Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the SumerSports show. Lindsay Rhodes and Sam Bruchhaus back from Vegas. Great week there last week talking about fantasy football and the various roster building strategies there. Now diving headfirst into the deep end of real life roster building with a major date on the NFL calendar. It is Cutdown Day. All 32 teams in the NFL needing to be at 53 as of 4 p.m. Eastern today. That was a half hour ago. So we've had some time for the biggest news to trickle down to us. And we've got a few guests with us today who know what it's like in the various buildings around the league right now. Former Jets general manager Mike Maccagnan and longtime NFL coach and defensive coordinator Chuck Bresnahan. Hi, guys.
Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Sam.
So, we know that this one is a tough day inside buildings. Mike, I want to start with you. What are your memories of having sat in that chair, watching guys come in and out, knowing you're about to give them maybe the best news of their life, maybe the worst news?
Yeah, it's never it's not an enjoyable day when you go through it. It's part of the business. Everybody understands it. It does kind of happen from, very young when you're an athlete to, again, being a professional athlete. Memories from it, a lot of it, you're just trying to make sure it goes smoothly and efficiently as possible. Again, the players, you ask them to be in a location, primarily in their rooms. And then I don't know, they still call it, we used to call it the Turk. That would be the unfortunate person that literally call them, escort them to the building. We'd always try to do this early in the morning to kind of get it, as soon as we felt comfortable, we knew what we were going to do. Just so we could start the process out so these players can start, transitioning. There's a lot of times nowadays they have 16 people on the practice roster. In a lot of cases, you said, hey, if you clear waivers, we'd like to bring it back or have you around. So it's not always bad news. And but there's always a lot of roster manipulation at that last minute, trying to make sure you make the right decisions and keep the right players and see if there's somebody else out there in the waiver wire you want to claim.
Fun fact about the Turk, Daniel Jeremiah was the Turk at one point at the Ravens. And I think everybody at this point who's, cares enough about the NFL to watch this show is familiar with his personality. Can you imagine Daniel Jeremiah, like the nicest human being in the whole wide world? And what a weird job that must have been like for him, of all people.
It's funny. I don't know how people get assigned that job. But it's a lot of cases, sort of, you said the younger people do it. And, and again, that's not the most threatening person to come down the hall and say, hey, a coach wants to see you get your book. But it's funny, having been like an intern, like when I first started, I remember going around, I wasn't the Turk, but I was also involved with picking the players up when they first got there at the airport, making runs back and forth. And especially the young rookies, you get to know them a little bit because they're all nervous and every friendly face they try and make a connection with. And then the sad part would be, 4 or 5 weeks later, you're driving to the airport, dropping them off,
So Chuck, I'm interested in the coach's perspective of this, because obviously when we think about drafting, we think heavily about the front office and the scouts, but the coaches have been evaluating day to day, probably hour by hour during camp. And now they're getting ready to deploy all these players into week one, basically. So what is the coach's process of evaluation and the coach's process on Cutdown Day?
Yes, it's a great point, Sam. It's another one of those days that it's truly unique to the NFL, because it's if you want to make some sort of comparison, you're putting on a Broadway show, you've gone through all your rehearsals. Well, now this is day one. You're going to open up that curtain, and this is the cast and the crew that you're going to do the work with. You've got to be ready to go. And during the whole process and the building of the foundation of this product that you're about ready to put together with your final 53, there's been a lot of detailed work that's gone into this. So it is an evolving situation in which relationships are built. You're losing veterans that you've had on your team for, number of years. You're gaining new talent. You're gaining new veterans through free agency. There's just such a growing process, but this is kind of the day that where you're going and you've got an idea. But yet at the same time, now with all the changes with practice squads and how they're made up and all that. It's a whole new game now. It starts a whole new part of the game. How are you putting together the rest of the team to get through the season? How are you evaluating what's out there now that has been cut and been released and has to clear way, going through the whole process, and Mike can hit on that. But it's just such an interesting day. But for a coach, you're now fine-tuned with what you've got, the roster you have, and how you're building your depth, all your different units, whether it's, by design or you're just in case type of situations because of injury or whatever. You've got to go through all those mental gymnastics, and it really starts the season off the right way.
So I like how you're referring to the fine tuning and then also having to build for the whole season as well. Because while there is turnover at the bottom of the roster, it's not necessarily as much as you would see in the offseason. And as we start seeing some of these young players who have been first or second round picks being dropped while they're on their rookie contract, I do have a hypothetical for y'all just to get a sense of the decisions. And we'll start with Mike here. If you have a young player who you think you can develop, but doesn't have a lot of special teams upside versus a veteran who, you're not going to develop, but does have a lot of special teams upside, how do you manage that type of decision going into the 18 weeks of the season?
Yeah. And Chuck would probably, obviously could relate to this. There's so many meetings you have before you get to the final cuts. And again, after every game, midweek, you're constantly, almost have a kind of a working depth chart. And you're trying to create situations in training camp where you can see the players compete against each other and try to figure out, hey, who's the best guys to keep. And Chuck obviously would probably agree with this. I mean, there's definitely offense, defense, and special teams. All, more or less equally important. Offense and defense does technically take more snaps over the season, but all those units are important. A lot of times it comes down to, you're trying to either maybe expose a young player to the waiver wire you'd like to keep, as opposed to maybe a veteran gunner who is a really good player. And again, it affects your potential for wins and losses because it's all about field position, and it's about, causing turnovers on those environments. So, again, it's usually when you go through the process, having been a general manager, having been a director, there's lots of discussions, and, at the end of the day, you're trying to make the best decision going forward. Sometimes it's a situation where, it's how the team is built. If you're in a complete rebuild mode, you may be more like, okay, like what's the drop off if we lose this good veteran, gunner, as opposed to keeping some young player we think may have a higher future and potential. And those are discussions, like I said, you have all the way through. But I've always sort of felt there's always spots you keep on the roster for, obviously, your specialists are obviously important, but and the snapper, but there's other players, like the gunners, the core special teams players, and some of those guys can be your best character, chemistry, leader guys on your team, also the veteran guys. So that's usually, those are always interesting discussions. But I think it depends also a little bit on where your team is at. If you're in a kind of a rebuild mode, you probably have an eye to the future. If you're in kind of, hey, we can go out there and win and be effective, everybody wants to win. And then you may make more exceptions, say, hey, let's keep certain players at these key positions, and maybe we'll lose a young guy, but down the road we can possibly replace him with another guy.
It's interesting because, so I mentioned Sam and I were in Vegas last week, like deep into fantasy football roster building conversations, right? And the only reason I bring this up is because I think that this is the way that a lot of people who play fantasy football, who are fans at home, this is the way they play GM. And so, like, when you get further into the fantasy draft, you are more likely, most people, to take swings at upside. You're like a lot of rookies are going to go there because you have unknown potential and they might be good, as opposed to someone who checks a bunch of boxes, but like we know what they are and it's never going to turn into a superstar. And I wonder if that's not, don't roll your eyes. I know there's so many ways that this is a different process, but I wonder if that's maybe one of the ways in which this is a different process, because you actually need that floor of play. Right. Like, you can't just take swings on, well, I don't know, maybe that guy is going to be so good later on. Like, it feels like that might be the biggest difference here in the two styles of roster building. We're over here projecting who we think might have upside, and you're like, if I don't see it, by a certain time, I kind of don't have time to develop it to a degree.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of like every player has a development arc, and sometimes, and we've seen this with many different positions. I mean, in particular, quarterback has it recently with, like a Baker Mayfield who, gets to a certain point, one team decides to move on, another team picks him up, gets in a different environment, still learning, growing, maturing. Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, both kind of similar players in that role. I mean, they're on different levels of their arc. But it is a hard league to play in, especially for a rookie. That's the tricky thing with a rookie, because even the season is longer, 18 weeks, 17 regular season games. But on top of that, it's they don't really expose not necessarily that level in college of intensity, but this is like they're playing against the best of the best of the best every week in, week out. So even when you have a rookie player, and there's some rookies that come in and be amazing and play well, those are always tricky things to project and try to, anticipate. And I think, again, you get into it a little bit, there's definitely a propensity towards, a veteran player who's established, what his level of play is. But when you start sort of cultivating your roster, you can't just, you have to have an eye to the future, and you have to, invest in players and they may not be ready for, initially to come out of the gate playing very well, but that's what happens over time.
Chuck, I'm curious about, in your position on the field as a coach, identifying who has it, what they have, what they don't have yet, where that line is for you. Like, what do you need to see in order for you to stand on a table and say, like, this guy, it's not there yet, we can't use him yet, but it's worth keeping around? Like, how do you know when what you have seen is enough and that there might be more to it?
Yeah, no, it's very important. And one of the things that Mike hit on that I think is very important for everybody to understand is the makeup of the team. Whether you're starting fresh with a new staff, new rebuilding project, as opposed to a cast of veterans, and just with the coaches and the organizations that I was blessed to have worked with, you got to see it from both ends. But, a guy like Coach Belichick, who really hung his hat on having the right veterans on the team to set the tempo in the locker room and on the practice field and how to do things the right way, to Mr. Davis, who was very player friendly, but he held them to a high level of accountability as well, is you have to make sure that you fit your young guys into the right roster. And so I go back to 2002. I've been at the Raiders for, I think, 3 years now. And Greg Biekert from Colorado was our starting Mike linebacker. And Greg was like another coach on the field. I mean, brilliant Mike linebacker, old school Mike linebacker, and really was an extension of me as a first-year coordinator or first-time coordinator in the NFL. And I was blessed to have him there. Well, in 2002, we decided that we're going to move on, and we draft Napoleon Harris out of Northwestern. And the only reason we were able to do that type of move and make a move from such a veteran is because of the surrounding cast. So to have Eric Barton and Bill Romanowski and the guys that we had around him, Rod Woodson behind him, Charles Woodson, that gave us the ability to put somebody like that in that position. So we would never have been able to do that with the roster that we had in Cincinnati when I went to the Bengals after leaving the Raiders, because we were a much more immature, younger unit. We did something like that, but it took us longer to gel than what we did in 2002 and ended up in the Super Bowl and playing John. So it's all based on what you have around you, but you have to kind of be ready to know how to fit the pieces into the puzzle that way.
So looking kind of at the differences between trying to select those players, how much do finances come into play? We saw Brian Robinson traded. That freed up quite a bit of cap space for the Washington Commanders. Is there like interpersonal locker room stuff that you got to consider, Mike, when you're really kind of talking to the coaches and talking to the scouts and talking to the players as well, especially your more veteran players? What are the individual considerations that draw that line for the final 53?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's their ability to produce it at a level on the field. I mean, that trumps kind of everything. If they can't go out there and make plays, you can't really lead. You sort of lose a little bit of that. I mean, you have chemistry stuff, but you have to kind of lead. It's like the military. You have to lead from the front. You have to go out there, play, perform. It's a locker room mentality, just like high school, just like college at any level. Guys kind of gravitate to certain guys, but they also have to go out there and, back it up on the field. A lot of the decisions financially, they're not made very whimsically. You have these discussions way in advance. You have different times where you have more leverage than, you're negotiating with agents all the time. But as you get into some of these processes, you're doing there's kind of roster management, there's roster construction, and watching some of the stuff, when you get to the end of training camp, usually you can always call teams and inquire about players that you may think that they would have availability. But the reality of it is, unless it's usually the team, and there's always communication, like the team is always putting stuff out there. Teams are always putting stuff out there. If they're trying to hey, you don't want to get to the 11th hour and try and make a deal. You have no leverage. So, it's funny. I know there's a discussion the other day about Cleveland carrying 4 quarterbacks. And of course, one team gets an injury at quarterback. Suddenly there's a market and Cleveland more or less gets what they gave to get them initially from Philly. But those kind of things happen all the time. I think really when you get into this, it's the, you're looking at what the player can do, presently. You're looking at sort of the roster makeup, roster construction, the chemistry in your locker room, and when you get to the final cut downs, you're never really saying, oh my God, we got to cut these guys just to make, you've already done all those negotiations. Usually those contracts are pretty much at that point in time done. But you may find in training camp, some other players have come on, played better. Some players, like I said, every time you go to training camp, guys, they have different arcs. Some guys are trending up, some guys are trending down. And then you have suddenly have a situation where you want to keep a younger player as opposed to a veteran player, but you want to make sure that guy can step in and do the job. And if you have a surplus, you're pretty actively out there trying to, again, some of it trickles out to the media, but for the most part, you're making a lot of behind the scenes calls on players all the time, trying to see if there's a market for a player out there, because you don't want to get caught in a position where, you have no leverage. That's the biggest concern usually when you're, working the roster and you're trying to decide who to keep. But you generally don't do a lot of contracts unless they're a holdout during training camp, because they're, everything's already set and done. You already have all your cap projections and salary decisions made.
One thing to add too, from a coaching standpoint, and every team is different. And the ones that I've been involved with that have been on the more successful end of it are the ones that Mike have a great relationship between the coaching staff and personnel side of the house when it comes to this, and that it's not done where it's a shock to the system. And I've had that happen as well. And I go back to, like to go back to Oakland, because that's kind of where I've spent most of my time. But, we had Bruce Allen there, and Bruce was very coach friendly, as far as dealing with us, and we were always involved with what was going on, and it was a collective effort, and there wasn't always 100% agreement, but the fact that relationship was built that way, I think, was really important. I mean, it is one thing about the locker room and building, but there's got to be that relationship to handle these, because these decisions are big, and they affect you more than what the general public sees, because it does affect the locker room. It affects that meeting room, the positional meeting room, the unit meeting room. It affects special teams. And so there's a lot that goes into it. So the best relationships lead to the best way to handle the situations and manage it.
That's a really good point. I think everybody can relate to that. Everybody knows of somebody who at work kind of is like the glue person that maybe keeps things together in ways that go unseen, that are hard to specifically quantify. So I would imagine that makes days like this particularly tough, and also makes it vital that, as you said, Chuck, that the front office and the coaching staff are all in communication on the same page, and those lines are open. Tootsie Pop Rachel has a really good question here in the chat, and wants to know if there was a specific cut in your career that broke your heart the most.
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's again, the one that comes to memory, I mean, there's lots of players. I mean, I was, as a general manager, you do kind of feel bad for him. I remember when D'Brickashaw Ferguson was kind of finishing up his career, and he is one of the most classy people, and his wife's lovely. And, it was one of those ones where you get those guys. And again, I was only with the Jets for a shorter period of time. I've been around teams where I've seen veteran players when I was with the Houston Texans for 15 years and the Washington Redskins before that, when we were really transitioning an older roster and that under that last Super Bowl under Joe Gibbs into, Norv Turner came on. But for me personally, having been a general manager, that was always, talking to, D'Brickashaw, it was because he was an amazing player. Actually, Nick Mangold probably would be also in that category. Again, I didn't draft those guys. But Nick was kind of like Santa Claus for our, Christmas. I mean, again, I'm being sort of sentimental here, but they're just really good players and people. And you get to a point in their career where they're just not, you have to make that tough decision. And, they're not easy decisions to make. And, but when those kind of, those are ones again, I don't want to say it's an impersonal process when you cut a player, but those are ones that you want to, again, have those conversations from a respect standpoint, just because he's done so much for those teams and organizations, even before you got there.
I'd imagine that's like Tony Jefferson today with the Chargers, to a degree. Like, guys who have been around forever, everybody loves them. And then it just becomes like the
one thing, and Chuck alluded to this also a little bit, like the chemistry, like you win with coaching, you win with players, you win with chemistry, a very simplified, approach to it. But it happens at every level. It happens in high school, happens in college, happens in the NFL. It's just, different sort of types of teams, and, some professional, some not professional. But that, again, that leadership part, that chemistry part, like that's a big deal. Like that really is. And young teams tend not, again, they're sort of developing it sometimes. And then you watch coaches come in or regime changes come in, new coach comes in, and all of a sudden they start parting ways with players. So they maybe don't really fit their system, or they just have they just see them differently. And sometimes, like I said, it's an interesting process when you're going through in terms of trying to make sure you're making the right decisions and maximizing kind of your opportunity cost. But those are always tricky things, and they take time to, kind of play themselves out. And that chemistry, culture, leadership part, sometimes and that's what you look for in players. I mean, not just being good football players, but you try to make sure you got good character people. But that's sort of a thing that, that takes a little time to develop. There's an old saying, like the best teams are the ones with the locker rooms, kind of, police themselves. The players sort of take control of the locker room, and they set the tone and the tempo. And, Chuck mentioned about Bill Belichick. That was always, I know players have gone there and played, that veteran players would come back and talk about it. And it was sort of the do your job mentality. But that, they had Tom and Bill, and they had a lot of other key players that were just cornerstone character people in that organization.
And that allows you to take some chances too, to bring in a player that you feel like your locker room can control and keep in the right path. And not that they're bad players or bad people. It's just when you bring somebody in that has a certain talent level, but he's had some roughness around the edges, you bring him into that type of situation. It's great. My dad was with Marv Levy, for all those years in Buffalo, and went to the 4 Super Bowls. And I remember him saying all the time, and I used to go in and sit with Coach Levy, and he was so just unbelievably generous with his time. And he never did anything in the locker room. The locker room handled itself. And the way Marv was with that team allowed that to be that way. And so they were very, very efficient, very, adept to really handling things on a day-to-day basis without ruffling the feathers. They handled it well. They moved about their business, and they continued with great success. So the more you can put that into perspective, I think, the better off you're going to be. The other thing that Mike hit on was, that leadership role. That also kind of plays in offensively, defensively, and special teams by what position you play. So when you make a move at a quarterback position or a Mike linebacker position, I was using Greg Diekert earlier, that may have been one of the more impactful move that I had to deal with because he was a dear friend. He was the guy I had the utmost respect for, but because of his role on the defense, he wasn't just a Mike linebacker. He was the heart and soul of that defense leading up until that 2002 year. And then all of a sudden he's in Minnesota and we've got a rookie linebacker who hasn't done anything yet, kind of holding the water there, but you have to find ways to work around that. So again, the leadership, I think, Mike, is very, very important, that you make sure you compensate for that and you're able to handle that.
So kind of on the flip side of this, we were talking about a bunch of veteran players. The Stardom Bedham podcast chimes in and they want to know about those young guys that kind of got away and had success elsewhere, but maybe they didn't fit given, you had some veteran players. So let's start with Mike. Mike, was there any players that like kind of really got away during your time in the NFL?
Well, it's funny. I think everybody probably has names and guys that, that had, again, you had at one point in time and then they had success later on. I mean, some of the ones that come to mind for me, and they're probably lesser known players, but it's funny. Like every time I see Detroit play, there's a punt returner, kick returner, and Khalif Raymond does actually play some wide receiver, and he's from Holy Cross. And it's funny. I think he's probably in his early 30s now. And we had him briefly with the Jets, and we, liked him coming in. He was a very young player at that point in time, and we were trying to find a returner to kind of fill a need for us. And this probably just echoes again. He's not a super high profile player, but again, he may have gone out there. I think he maybe muffed a punt or something like that. And again, players, you understand, like you have a very small window to make an impression. And if the coaches suddenly feel like, hey, you're not good enough or we don't trust you, they move on. It's funny. There's another player, and again, these are sort of obscure guys to a degree, but there's Jesse Davis, who was an offensive lineman that played for Miami for a number of years, and we had him on our practice roster. He was from Idaho, I believe. He was a late convert to offensive lineman from a defensive lineman. So sometimes those guys have a different maturity level. But those there's guys, and he ended up having a good run for Miami as a starter. And again, maybe not a special player, but, hey, he's a starting caliber player in the NFL. But those kind of guys sort of come to mind. I'm sure there's more if I really, delved into it. But I think every team kind of has that. And it's like, you don't want to, it's funny. The one I always remember too, because I remember when he came back into the league was Cameron Wake, it's funny. I remember Cameron Wake at his pro day because I scouted him in college, and he had a good pro day. He ran like 4.6 flat in Penn State, and although they do have a slightly downhill slope they run on, they'd have real. But they would always want to run the one way. They didn't want to run the other way. Yeah, that's fine.
We had a believe me, in Oakland, we had a conversion for that too.
So I still remember this, like Cameron Wake, had a heck of a pro day, vertical jump crazy, like 40 some inches. I don't know, can't remember what it was, but heck of a pro day. And was a college free agent. Nobody drafted him. The Giants signed him as a college free agent. They cut him in June. Like he didn't even make it to training camp. But the funny part, looking back on it, so eventually he goes to the Canadian Football League, rush in, comes back down. Miami signs him for a significant contract. We were actually one of the teams at that point in time also bidding for his services, but obviously went to Miami. And but it's funny. I was going back. I was like, okay, well, the people don't realize or remember, but Cameron Wake in college played off the ball, kind of like a Mike inside linebacker, and he didn't have great instincts. And he was a little straight line-ish, a little tight, very explosive player. And eventually went to the CFL, played defensive end or rush end in a passing league, and tore the league up, got 20 plus sacks, all this kind of stuff. A lot of teams obviously went and tried to sign him and he came back down. But like some of those things are ones where you kind of come across, you're like, well, shoot, if we had just outbid Miami, or had somebody had the foresight to be like, we should try him as an outside linebacker, like before we went to the Canadian Football League, well, you would have had an impactful all-time ranking career sack player. But there's lots of, like, sometimes they come through your own building, which hurts. And other times they're the ones you kind of don't quite get or just miss out on. And they turn out to be really good players. And those are things. I mean, hey, the other one was Kurt Warner. I mean, he again went to Green Bay, never actually got the training camp, got cut way before that, and kind of puttered away in the Arena League, and anybody else could have signed him, but it had a heck of a quarterback for not a lot of a very little investment. So
there's so many stories like that, Mike. We had Justin Smith in Cincinnati, and when the Bengals drafted him, it was prior to me getting there. But I know that the expectation was a double-digit sack guy. And that really wasn't Justin. Justin was worth his weight in gold as a blue-collar, tough, hard-nosed football player that would go from snap to whistle, and he would leave it all on the field. Well, he ends up going to San Francisco and playing in the 34 defense and finding his niche and, perennial Pro Bowl player. And so it's, again, one man's vision is a little bit different than somebody else, but there's such value there. And so, yeah, I think every team's got a handful of these stories where they've gone on and done some things for other teams that may be a little bit different than what had been projected for that person at a given team. But yeah, there's a lot of those stories.
So a final question I kind of want to ask just about the craziness of today is obviously we have the waiver wire. You're hoping guys make it through the waiver wire in order to get on the practice squad. Mike, how did you kind of manage today? Was it a lot of sleepless nights? Were you making a lot of calls to agents? How was the management going on?
It's funny. You stay in constant contact with the agents. And they tend to know because they're going to know, and they'll know before, the waiver wire comes out. And, they'll be like, hey, I got 5 teams calling me saying they're claiming them. It's like, all right. And then as soon as you kind of hear that, again, you have history with the agents. You kind of know who's shooting straight or who's knowledgeable. But again, it's all the work you do is been done weeks before, like over a process. So you don't want to, again, if you lose somebody, you're going to go downstairs and talk to coach and say, hey, listen, we lost so-and-so and so-and-so to the waiver wire. Here's what we discussed about pivoting. Now, maybe it's something you have in your building, or maybe we're like, hey, they got these other kids we like, and they probably, the coaches by that point in time already taken a look at them. So they've given us their feedback on them, like, hey, who we want to pivot to next. But a lot of times you do so much work, for a lot of things that just never come to be, like you just prepare for. And even with the draft, I mean, you grade, in essence, 1,500, 1,400 players, and you draft 7 of them, assuming you don't have any extra draft picks. And so that's really what happens a lot of times. It's like you pivot, you adjust, you again, and you kind of know like who you think's going to get through, who's not going to get through. And then you just have to wait till, the time. And, but pretty quick, like you do have ways of finding out.
I want you to clear up one thing for me real quick that I literally did not know prior to today. And I'm curious about whether or not it's even true. And that is that Ross Tucker put out a tweet earlier today saying that you don't actually find out that you made the 53-man roster when you make the 53-man roster. And as somebody who had all of my knowledge about today comes from Hard Knocks episodes, I was aghast because I definitely remember people getting pulled into offices and having their dreams made in person. Were those conversations that you actually had with people, or did you just have to have the bad ones that day? How did the people who make the 53-man find out? I want that side of the story.
So wait, so Russ was more or less saying he sat in his hotel room. Yes. Nobody recalled him to make the team. The phone didn't ring. Nobody knocked on the door. No, okay. So I was like, yes, that.
Does his agent finally got in touch with him and was like, you're in, but didn't hear from the team. And I don't know if that's just his experience or if that is the experience. What's normal?
I think, honestly, you're so focused. So as I said earlier, you're so focused on doing this. It's a big process. You got to, again, when you have your final cuts, you got to go through an exit physical, just like when you bring them in, an entry physical. You got to get their paperwork. You got to get their playbook back. You got to all these, there's a lot of things you got to do, and it's, again, a kind of a traumatic thing. And in essence, once they go on waivers, there's a, period of time before they clear. But you don't want to have a misstep on it. So all your focus is really on the guys you're cutting, or parting ways with. And you're trying to factor in okay, the rookies, again, you get them through fast. The veteran guys, the difficult conversations where you're like, hey, you want to at least personalize it a little bit, just purely out of respect for the player and your history with them. But yeah, and do we call, Russ Tuckers of the world, but hey, you made it, it's like, again, the agent probably does that more than anything else. And the agents usually are always in tune to that because they're constantly finding out, hey, is he going to make it? He's not going to make it. And if you tell him, yeah, no, thumbs up, he's going to make it. But the sad part sometimes is guys will make it. They come in for the meeting, they go to dinner, and then suddenly the waiver wire comes out and you've claimed 3 guys. So, okay, we got to cut these 3 more guys to get down under the roster. And it's,
Right.
it's almost like you get that, it's like, it's almost even a worse feeling. But at least hey, you may get claimed by somebody else also. But you lost.
Jeff, I'd be standing outside that GM store going, can I call them? Can I call them? Like anyone we know for sure is making this, like that's the moment I want to experience. I want to be the person that tells them, like, you're here.
Well, and the one thing that you have to understand, every team's different. So each organization is truly unique in the way they handle it, whether it's one guy is the Turk telling them they're gone, or whether it's the coaches getting to do it. Mr. Davis was big and John Gruden was big. He started it, was us all talking to our players. And if you were letting somebody go, we wanted to be the first ones to talk to them. And then it worked through that way. And
wait, what do you mean? You as the coach or the position coach or
position coaches, we all talked to them. Now, somebody had
to got to the GM?
Oh, yeah. We would have them before they got to the GM. They would go to Bruce after us. But we had an opportunity to thank them and then go. There may have been a time just because of backlog where they would have seen Bruce first, then come to us. But we had the opportunity to visit with them. There's other organizations we never saw. It was done and you moved on with what you had. And it was like what Mike said, because you made it right now doesn't mean you made it 48 hours from now, because things are ever changing and ever evolving, and you have to be ready for that as well.
Yeah, the one thing I would also add to that too is that, if a guy gets on the waiver wire and he clears waivers and you want to put him on your practice roster, you may also have other teams, like once they become free agents, every other team can call him and say, hey, Oak is there, come here. We have a better situation. We're going to activate you in 2-3 weeks, whatever. And so just to, circle back on what Chuck said, like having those relationships, like the closest guys to the players tend to be the coaches because they spend all that time with them. And it's kind of funny. You bringing back memories like Chuck, having been a coach, and you have that first meeting after the cuts, and it's like you start off the first meeting of training camp. There's 90 plus people in the room, and you can look to your left, look to your right. Some of you guys won't be here in like 6 weeks, but that first meeting after you make the initial roster, I don't know if Chuck want to comment on that. I always thought I always would stand in the back in those, even before I was a GM. Because it's sort of that coming together, like, okay, you went through this experience, and this is the team going forward. But I don't know if Chuck, you have any feelings or thoughts?
Oh, yeah, you're exactly right, Mike. I mean, that's what I was trying to allude to earlier. It's that Broadway show, man. There goes the curtain. It's opening now, and there's the people sitting there that are going to be doing this production. And yes, there'll be some changes for various reasons, but that's kind of the unique deal. And what's funny from a coaching standpoint is it keeps going downhill. So from the team room, you break down into your unit meetings, and you got your units. From your unit, you break down into your position group. So it's all becomes more and more personal as you work down the chain of command. And it's really, it's an exciting day. It's a fun day. It's an emotional day, but it's really the start of something special because it's the start of the next season.
Last question. I keep saying this. We told you guys 20 minutes. Here we are 38 minutes later. Sorry about that. Last question, I swear. The cuts process has changed over the years, right? It used to be more gradual. Do you like that better than this, or do you like this better than that? And I'd be curious about both of your answers, because I would imagine, you're coming from different positions.
I'll jump in real quick and just say, to me, doesn't matter. Okay. I don't prefer either way. You have to deal with it. So you find a way to maximize it and move on rather than, pick or choose. To me, I don't know if it makes a difference. Mike,
I mean, the old way, though, so in the old way, when you're cutting it down, certain people are getting more reps at the end. So I could see the value of that from a coaching standpoint. On the flip side, I could see the value of getting some of these guys that are on the bubble more opportunity to show you before you have to make a decision about it. So it's kind of pros and cons, I would think.
It is. And you also have more, you have larger practice squads. It's all changed. So that, the whole realm of the situation has changed. So I think you're right, Lindsay. I mean, before you had to get more exposure to them, and because it was incremental, that was harder to do. But to me, you got to maximize whatever process is there.
Yeah, I would probably say something similar. I mean, when you would trim down the initial one before the final one, it weeds it out a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're kind of grading all the guys that are potentially bubble guys. But in reality, back before you had 4 preseason games and a 5th if you played in the the Hall of Fame game. But yeah, you get to that point, it's probably easier now. I mean, I think historically there weren't as many. I mean, again, this process of efficiency. I know as many great players get cut when you go cut to 75 or whatever. But now at the end, it's like, hey, it's one big dump, and you just kind of sit through it. And so many of those guys, like, again, circle back. I mean, there's 16 now on the practice roster, so it's that's it. But it's I don't. Again, I'm like Chuck. You just get in the routine. You just know when they're going to be cut. And if somebody gets cut early at 75, then you'd be like, hey. We used to do that. We'd bring guys in for workouts, and backup possible practice roster guys, stuff like that. We like a little bit. So,
Mike Maccagnan, Chuck Bresnahan, you guys are the best. Thank you so much for staying here twice as long as our producer Stopsky told you we were going to keep you. Stopsky, you just need to start padding. You need to understand who you're working with here. Lindsay and Sam can't shut up, mostly this one. And especially when we have access to people like this to talk to about football decisions as they're happening right now. You can't make me stop the conversation. So anyway, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate your time.
Yep.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Sam.
So Sam, that was very interesting in a number of different ways. And I kept writing down names as they were talking about, we wanted to talk kind of big picture with them and thought process. And then now we can kind of apply it to the different people whose names have come out today. They were talking about the makeup of the team, and I wrote down Rams because of the Chris Paul Jr. cut. Right. There are other team makeups for which that wouldn't necessarily make sense to have a 5th round draft pick and then cut him right away. Right. So I think that was maybe one of the more surprising cuts that's happened today for a number of different reasons. What do you think it tells us about the Rams specifically, without much knowledge about why he was cut or anything like that, but just the simple fact that a 5th round draft pick has been turned around really fast?
Well, I think you're really, in particular, with regards to the Rams, you got to think of how they have built that defense over the last 2 years. And first, they basically tore it down to the studs after Aaron Donald retired. And last year it was basically all young players except for Christian Roseboom, who was a veteran linebacker who's no longer on the roster. And so it is interesting that they wanted to bolster that linebacker position, but ultimately decided to go with a little bit more veteran path, given their general willingness to keep it young. I think perchance that's a position that they think they want to keep a veteran group at. And I wouldn't be shocked if they are active in the waiver wire, particularly at probably some of the DB positions as well. One that I thought about, Lindsay, on the kind of flip side, but very similar, was Beanie Bishop from the Pittsburgh Steelers, a guy who played a lot last year, who I thought did a pretty good job on a very good defense. All of a sudden you add Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay, to quite veteran players, really guys who have achieved a lot in their career, but are also much older, and on other teams, including the Miami Dolphins, should he have stayed there, they would have been cut candidates potentially. You let a player who played 500 plus snaps for you on a very good defensive group go after his rookie year in exchange for those 2 new players, which I thought was very interesting, especially given the success that the Pittsburgh Steelers had last year. The cornerback situation was probably the weakness of the team, but it wasn't really a killer weakness. What are your thoughts, Lindsay?
I wonder if my primary thought about Beanie, and then also with regards to Chris Paul Jr. also, is I wonder if they were talking about how a lot of times agents sort of know what's happening and people know who's going to hit the waiver wire and how many teams are going to put in claims. I feel like those are 2 guys that probably would be pretty heavily claimed. Like they would go pretty early at the top of the order. And I wonder if their agents knew this was coming and if this wasn't a surprise to them, but it was a surprise to us. I'm really curious about the behind the scenes that goes into that. Like how many people are legitimately shocked today and how many people can kind of feel it coming.
Yeah. And speaking of the behind the scenes, we may get to see that a little bit because KJ Hamler from the Bills, who was kind of a Hard Knocks fan favorite, also was cut. And when you look at some of the data, it indicates that at least in the limited sample size of snaps that he played, he did perform pretty well. And it's interesting that he'll no longer be with the Bills there. And we may get to see some of the behind the scenes there. So I'm definitely going to be tuning in to Hard Knocks this week. Kind of get a sense.
Have you been?
I have. This is the first year I have not.
No, me either.
Been, but it's just because it's the team with Josh Allen. It's kind of like the Cowboys 2 years ago, where it's like the Cowboys have a bunch of stars. I'm not really interested in the stars. It's not the Detroit Lions from a couple years ago. It wasn't the Raiders when they were kind of moving to Vegas or not moving to Vegas and had all these moving parts. So I kind of like more of the chaos when it comes to Hard Knocks. The Bills just aren't a chaotic team, really. Not
to take us completely off subject, but I did see somebody posting about this on social media. Like, this is the year that they had not watched any, and has anyone been watching? Nobody's talking about it. And I kind of wonder if, bigger picture, so many teams are doing their own behind the scenes series. And production has gotten more professionalized that like a team can do. So I wonder how many people out there are just like, I'm dying to see what happens behind the scenes. And also Hard Knocks has become very formulaic, right? Like the off-season Hard Knocks, which will probably never happen again for obvious reasons, Giants, Saquon. But I feel like that was actually cool because it pulled back the curtain of something that we actually had never seen before. And now the Hard Knocks, this part of the season, we're like, okay, I kind of know. And now you're going to have somebody come in and they're going to be sad and we're going to follow somebody to the zoo. And they're trying to make the team. And like, it feels like, I don't know. Also the sense of falling in love with those guys that are that are on the bubble. Like right. We all have fallen for that okie doke, only to go on and find them not really being people that you're following that much throughout the season, which is not to say there's not value to the human interest element of it, but like it doesn't really push forward that frequently. Well,
so also bring it back to what Chuck and Mike were saying. I found it interesting that they didn't find a big difference between like the multi cuts, the week by week cuts all the way down to the 90 band.
Right. I think, yeah.
Right, because like we're talking about it in terms of media here, like I think that does make a difference when you're kind of on the chopping block each week. And then I also thought it was interesting because they kind of touched on it, they kind of mentioned it, of having to be able to have like a lot larger practices. Like that's a real thing because as has been stated by many people, including by Chuck and Mike when we talked to them a couple weeks ago, like you can't really practice during the regular season for the reason that you really only have 53 players. Like you have to be really strategic about how you are using your players. And when you have nearly double that, you can really kind of get after it for an entire preseason. But then at the same point in time, some of those guys are probably having a single digit to double like a 10 to 20% chance of actually making the team, despite having practiced for the better parts of a month, or if they're a rookie for the better parts of 2 or 3 months with the team, which I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, how they said, we just changed our process in March and then when did it that way rather than like really taking it taking a toll or not taking a toll or being a value add to the quality of those practices. So I thought that was really interesting.
All this kind of speaks to the larger issue of development too.
Right.
And I just have long maintained, and I don't feel like my thoughts have been disproven yet. I think that the league, we talk about the league and certain players within the league as being development guys. Like, oh, this is a guy we could take an X round and then develop him.
Right.
Good luck. Like nobody gets developed. I mean, they're always outliers. They're like, and I don't think it's because people don't want to develop them. I think that the resource management is just like, we're busy. We're trying to get ready for a game. Like once the season starts, I got a priority here and my priority is this, and I'm going to lose my job if my specific players at this position aren't ready to face the team that we're playing on Sunday and all the specific, like you don't have time to pick somebody up who's your second or third string, or even in some cases your starter, and say, like, let's really break this down. And like, so what do we need to do to just get better? Let's go back to the basics. Like, this just doesn't happen in the NFL that frequently. And I think that kind of goes to the question that I asked them about, like, the upside versus the, like, can you at least get it done for me now? Like, can you not be a problem for me? And I think in the, real football versus fantasy, like, the floor really matters. And those guys that are not exciting players, but are not going to mess their job up, like, they're not going to win a game for you, but they're not going to lose a game for you either. Right. Like, that is a priority. And that's not attractive to us in fantasy. We only want upside. But like, the NFL doesn't work that way.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because I was lucky enough at a very young age, probably in high school, to get a sense that special teams is what allows you to be developed long term. Like, if you want to be if you're like a borderline college player, not a 5-star recruit, the way you get on a college team and get developed at the college level is by being good at special teams. It's even more so the case at the professional level, because you think of the positions where you typically will see a player kind of either break out or see a growth in snaps, and it's typically going to be those guys who are more built to be on kickoff or punt. You're talking about DBs, maybe wide receivers from a time to time, safeties, linebackers. Like, those are the guys you typically see kind of grow as compared to, an offensive lineman, where maybe you'll be on field goal, but you're probably not going to be able to kick off or be a real special teams impact player. And it brings about a story that our data scientist and machine learning engineer, Udit Ranasaria, brought up with the Browns and close to me, because he went to Tulane as well. He's a transfer from ULM, was Aiden Huntington, who in our SumerScore was very good in the pass rush. But 2 or 3 weeks ago, you started seeing Kevin Stefanski say that he was going to get more reps on defense because they were using him on kickoff, and they figured that he could probably make the team just by being on kickoff. Interesting body type. Like, he was really fast, but like, he's like a 6', 6'1", 3 tech. At Tulane, he played on the outside and wasn't really a special teams guy. So it's like really a really interesting mix of stuff, but just kind of a small story of how, special teams can really make a difference and allow you to be developed, despite at the quarterback position. Like, you're not getting developed because you're not playing on special teams, unless you're Taysom Hill, of course.
Who are some of the other, we've mentioned a couple of defensive guys that were released today. Anybody else catch your eye? I'll tell you one for me, and this is, I've mentioned fantasy a bunch of times. Obviously, it's well established that I'm pretty passionate about fantasy football, and we talked about it a lot last week. And one of my rookies that I like a lot this year, at cost ADP, is Torrey Horton with the Seahawks, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling getting cut today by the Seahawks. I think kind of is like an arrow up moment for the rookie wide receiver there. Anyone else? Hunter Renfrow, released by the Panthers, is interesting.
Those are both really interesting ones. I saw you comment on the Torrey Horton thing, and especially considering the success that we saw from MVS with the Saints last year. Obviously, they were playing, well down the roster wide receivers at that point in time, but that was pretty interesting to me. I think Renfrow is interesting because it also indicates their thoughts on perhaps what they could get for Adam Thielen, or obviously did not want for Adam Thielen. That's still something that's on the bubble. Maybe that can change, as Mike and Chuck talked about, as the waiver wire kind of spins and turns. Maybe they're able to pick someone up. It ends up being a good enough compensation for Thielen. And then another interesting wide receiver drop was Malachi Corley from the Jets. I think that's a really interesting one, because we didn't really consider that they had great depth at the wide receiver position. It would have made sense to kind of keep him at the wide receiver position. I think it's probably a thing where they preferred someone that could play special teams and was a major special teams component. He had a little bit of returning upside there, but that was another really interesting move on the offense, considering, it seems like it's going to be the Garrett Wilson show for the Jets this year.
Malachi, one of the later round fantasy picks that I picked up a lot last year, kept thinking that he was going to be like the Deebo Samuel type kind of wide receiver on that team, incorporated in a variety of different ways. Turned out not so much to be the case. Aside from Cutdown Day, this wasn't a transaction, but it was an announcement, and that's Saints making it clear that they're going to go with Spencer Rattler in week 1. I think you were always leaning in that direction when we had this conversation in the past.
Right. I mean, like, from the data perspective, there was a real discussion in the preseason of at what point a team like the Saints or a team that had a quarterback need, which it really was only the Titans or the Steelers or people like that, and they obviously got it at different ways, but of given the tier breaks on the consensus big board of what like expectation would be if you just looked at the numbers, and Spencer Rattlers as like a 5th round pick, and Tyler Shucks, who was expected to be at least a late day 2 selection, if not further, were kind of the same. And then you keep an eye on the fact that Spencer Rattler was able to start games last year and was able to at least move the ball a little bit, even though the success was not there at all. He was one of the worst quarterbacks as compared by EPA per player, success rate, and stuff like that. But the expectation was still kind of the same. And I think it's an interesting play, just given Tyler Shuck's age. I think Tyler Shuck's actually a year older than Spencer Rattler. It'll be interesting to see how they approach it. I think that, they let Jay Kaner go. They're going to go with 2 players. I wouldn't be shocked if they do end up moving someone to the practice squad, like Deckers from Iowa State, who they had all throughout camp. Perhaps they end up picking someone up like a Tommy DeVito or somebody like that. But what the Saints are doing at the quarterback position is really interesting, and I think it indicates kind of how they're going to approach this year. I think they're probably going to be a little bit more run-heavy team, especially given Kelvin Banks really showed out well in the preseason. They like Talise Fuaga. I think this is going to be a little bit more of an old-school attack for the Saints this year.
I watched Stofsky, our producer behind the scenes, his face when you mentioned Tommy DeVito, because Stofsky, do you want to come on and do you want to rant for a little bit? Because I know that you've had some stuff that you want to get off your chest about poor Tommy DeVito.
Listen, I love Tommy DeVito. That's my guy. That's okay. So listen, I think about Tommy DeVito is the discourse around this poor kid is a little ridiculous. I'm not sure if you saw what happened today, which is, whenever Tommy gets brought up by idiots, it's always about how, he cost us a shot at Jaden Daniels, or he cost us a shot at Drake May, which is such a ridiculous thing on the day a guy gets cut, like a 20-something-year-old gets cut, we're criticizing him for trying to win football games, which is his job, which is ridiculous. Because what I remember Tommy for was when the Giants were going through maybe one of the most depressing seasons they've had in like a decade, like him actually bringing fans back to the stadium to enjoy football in December, which I will take. Was he making this roster? We knew he wasn't making this roster. Like that, you would have known in March when these deals were done.
100%. But yes.
Yeah, but he was a good player. He did what he had to do. And for listen, you hear from all the drunk dudes in New Jersey all the time, like, oh, we could have gotten Janie, whatever. But for national media to say it, it's just how far gone are we? That this is what we're talking about. Come on, ridiculous.
Well, as if it has anything to do with actually him, as opposed to
because all of the players played really well for the Giants in the preseason. Early returns from some of our advanced metrics were kind of catching my eye. I know we're going to talk about teams that caught our eye in the preseason later, but the Giants' efficiency at every quarterback, Jackson Dart, Jameis Winston, and Russell Wilson, and Tommy DeVito really, really caught my eye, because I'm like, maybe something's here.
Yeah, listen, I hope he goes somewhere where he gets a shot. I'd love to have him back in the practice squad. I hope he gets a shot. No, Lindsay, you've been behind the scenes. You've seen this stuff. My first interaction with Tommy was during that Packers game. Actually, it was during the Jets game when he got subbed out. And usually when the starting quarterback's in the room for a press conference, it's full. There was 2 people in Tommy's press conference. He's just sitting there. Listen, and he's just taking. He's taking questions. He's trying.
I tell you, I would, if I were in that room prior to it starting, if I had the most important meeting of my life to go to, I would sit through that press conference and miss the meeting. Like, I cannot watch that happen.
Like that poor kid. And then you watch him get this like weird cult following, and people are now filling his press conferences. It's like, this kid worked really hard. So for someone to go on a failing network and talk about that.
Oh, yeah, bye.
Ridiculous.
Bye. Bye. Oh, Matt. Should I not have welcomed him? It's his anyway. We got some passion here today. You already mentioned we got like our deep data metrics from the preseason today. So Sam and I have been spending the entire day nerding out before we get to the contracts, because we have yet to talk about Terry McLaurin and the deals that have gotten done, and then the deal that has not gotten done. Let's talk about our takeaways from the preseason, since we've kind of gone there already. What has stood out to you positively, negatively? You've had some data to go through now. Like what do you think you feel differently about?
The number one thing that I am getting a little worried about for myself, because it's really optimism for a team, is that I had talked for 2 or 3 months about how I didn't think that there was massive improvement in the Chicago Bears roster as constructed. And moreover, that you have to have a degree of uncertainty when a new offense coordinator takes over for a second-year quarterback who did not perform extravagantly efficiently last year. And early takeaway, week 1 of the preseason, I didn't love what I was seeing from the Bears. I was a little confused. We talked about it with Mike Renner. And then it kind of has started to come together. And all of a sudden, you see a Luther Burden start to look really good. And you see Caleb start to perform really well. And then, like I was saying with the Giants, you see Tyson Bagent start to get it together. And it could be an indication that, they were kind of drinking out of the fire hose, seeing what they could get away with in the early parts of training camp. And now it's cut down to the lean, mean machine that Ben Johnson has orchestrated for the Lions in the past couple of years. So I am keeping a very close eye on the Bears, because I was pretty sure, or at least a little bit confident, that they were going to be a solid under team going into this year. And I still think they could, because I still wonder how much depth they have. Injuries come into play as the season goes on. I think really the only place where they have true depth is at the wide receiver and tight end position. But if Ben Johnson is one of those hires, one of those generational play callers, this may look very differently through week 5 and 6.
Yeah, I can't remember what the filter was in terms of snaps, but it was relatively high, maybe 40 or more. And in this context, in terms of our Sumer scores from the preseason, Caleb and Bagent both scored in the top 4 at quarterback, which is wild and makes you feel like it's less about, okay, tons of context is needed, right? Starters versus backups, who's on the field, the level of simplicity in terms of game plans by the defense. We're not touting like this specific evaluation saying that this means that because they played well in the preseason that they're going to play. But I think that those two guys both taking the field and then grading out well by our standards might point us to Ben Johnson. And specific scheme related, and like putting you in good positions and that sort of understanding, which is what you're hoping for from Ben Johnson. And so I like the early returns on that. And Austin Booker, holy heck, one of the highest scoring guys in the preseason period with a pretty high snap count, also 47. Mine was, I'm gonna be the Debbie Downer. And I'm going to talk about the Dolphins in a way that they don't want me to talk about them right now. And I feel like my takeaway from the preseason is just some of it is specific on the field from game stuff. Some of it is data driven. Some of it is like, it's like the vibes coming out of Miami right now are not good, and not like, it's just consistent negativity, right? Like the starters struggled against the Jaguars backups. They played their starters into the second quarter in the last preseason game, and the Jaguars rested their starters for the game. So you are having your ones go against twos at the very least, and not particularly crushing it. Like they won the game. We all know, I think at this point, that the win or loss in the preseason doesn't matter. It's just how well you're able to do it. They were at the goal line and unable to punch it in quite a few times. The secondary is legitimately worrisome. And they did make a move today that I think kind of co-signs that evaluation from the preseason, and that they went out and they signed Bills veteran cornerback Rasul Douglas, a 1-year deal for $3 million. So they don't have a lot of experience in the secondary, and there were just multiple examples. They had joint practices against the Lions, where it was over the top. People from all sides saying like, this is the most lopsided joint practice that I've ever seen. And no, Tyreek and Jalen Waddle weren't on the field. And so like, I understand it's just all of the things just and then Achane is hurt. And then Jalen Wright looked terrible in the preseason. He was, by the way, our advanced data, tracking data metrics, ranked 99th out of 99 running backs that played 10 plus snaps in the preseason. And had a lower leg injury, is not healthy, had one really bad play that dragged his score way down, only 14 snaps. So it's a small sample size that like, I'm just saying like, it is one thing after the other that makes me feel like, God, a little bit of a ray of sunshine is what we desperately need down there in the Sunshine State. Oh, what?
I think with the Dolphins, a bet on them is like a bet on the coaching at this point, and a bet on Tua, obviously, as well. Like we haven't seen Tua put together a awful whole season since Mike McDaniel has been there, and so it kind of is still a bet on Tua, on Mike McDaniel. And I think the discussion has to become that Mike McDaniel has found a way to construct a good offense, irregardless of really who is on the field, sans Tua Tagovailoa. And then last year, we were having very similar conversations about the quality of the defense. Obviously, they still had Jalen Ramsey, but Calais Campbell seemed to be their only healthy defensive lineman, who is, up in his late 30s at that point. And Andy Weaver was just able to pull out an excellent defense. And I think people really, really overlooked that as the core reason that they were even in the playoff conversation at all, which was pretty shocking down the stretch to really, if you go back and look at the record, the discussion all season, given what happened to the Miami Dolphins, Tua getting hurt, not looking great on TV, Tyreek getting in the situations that he was in and also being injured and so forth and so on, you wouldn't have thought that this was a borderline playoff team. It was because Andy Weaver was able to construct somehow a not just suitable, a pretty good above average top 10 defense in the league last year as it pertains to expected points added allowed. And I think that is the bet. If you think that coaching really is a massive difference in this league, and you think that Tua can maintain a relatively good bill of health, the Dolphins, that's the play for the Dolphins. And I think the question becomes, can they overcome all of the down arrows, like you said, Lindsay, that they currently have?
I don't know that I know that coaching is a strength of theirs at the moment. And I have been a Mike McDaniel fan. Is it Daniel or Daniels?
Just one Daniel.
Okay.
There is Mike McDonald and Mike McDaniel and various other Mikes.
I know, but it's the Josh McDaniels and Mike McDaniel that really messes me up. Like, so anyway, sorry about that. Little aside, I think I have been a big fan of his. I liked in the first couple of years how specific his roster build was. We're looking for speed. We're looking for getting guys in open space, lots of motion, lots of all that kind of stuff. When they didn't take him off the field, but when they did not have Tua last year, the fact that it all fell apart so dramatically made me a little bit more worried about the coaching. And maybe that's not fair. And, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I was concerned that he needed Tua. So, like that it was so dramatically different without him.
Well, it's such an interesting and convoluted entanglement. And friend of SumerSports, Michael McKelvey, just dropped an excellent video on YouTube about entanglement, which we helped out with and gave some data for. And this is probably like the closest entanglement I've ever seen, because Tua was an unsuccessful player, at least in his rookie year, without Mike McDaniel. And then all of a sudden Mike McDaniel comes and they're a certified top 5 EPA per play team year after year after year after year. Even like last year when Tua was on the field, they were still extremely efficient. It looks different than any other offense. It almost resembles basketball to a certain degree, or other sports more than football, because Tua can get the ball out so quickly, but also because of the way these designs are and the elements from the 50s, the wing T elements in the run game, and the Shanahan style outside zone stuff, and moving Jonnu Smith kind of from a tight end to almost like a wing back, full back all over the field. They had never used tight ends. All of a sudden, their tight end is their leading catcher. Alec Ingold became a part of that. There's so much weird stuff that goes on with this offense that I can't tell if it's Tua, but people seem hesitant to say that Tua is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And so that's why I kind of lean a little bit more Mike McDaniel's direction.
There is something to him, Mike McDaniel. Like, good coaches, you want them to build something specific, right? Like, it's not just put the next guy in there, like, you want to build to the strengths of your team.
Right.
And so I guess you could make an argument that that's him specifically having done that. Like, what does Tua do well? Gets the ball out fast. He's able to, read the defense and diagnose where the ball should go. And then he does it quickly, and he gets him to the ball to the speedsters in space and lets them pick up a bunch of yards after the catch. And they just had a hard time finding somebody that could check those exact same boxes. And the next component there that points to it not necessarily being bad coaching is that's what they built. The whole roster is built to do that.
Right.
Like, so if you can't find that point guard, so to speak, then I could see that being problematic and not necessarily pointing to, like, how do you completely rework an entire NFL team mid-season when you've built a team to run one specific way?
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about, I guess, one of the bright spots of this team is we've seen Ollie Gordon kind of become a name that all of a sudden is relevant in the Dolphins offense. And Ollie Gordon,
round rookie, might start week 1.
Yeah, he doesn't fit that narrative. This is like an old school big back that 8 carries at Oklahoma State. At one point, Mike Gundy said that there was some off the field stuff, and Mike Gundy said his suspension was going to be getting 60 carries instead of his normal 35 when he was at Oklahoma State. And he's not at all the Jalen Wright, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane 4-2 guy who's just a burner and can get involved in the passing game. This is kind of more of an old school running back. So I'm interested to see what it'll look like, especially if he starts gaining carries down the stretch.
You said big back, and I heard it, and that's how you know that I have a preteen in my house. Let's go to, real quick, the contracts. Okay, so Terry McLaurin got paid. We are not surprised that either of these contracts got done, that nobody's being traded, that are you a little bit surprised that Trey think he was moving?
I am not necessarily surprised that they are. I didn't think that they were going to get traded at any given point in time. I think more so the Trey Hendrickson situation. Like, I just don't know if this was suitable. If this outcome was suitable, like why it took this long, or you know what I'm trying to say, Lindsay? Like, I'm just confused. I'm just a little confused.
What? So, who are you confused for? Are you confused about why Trey would sign this?
Yes.
So, what was his other option at this point in time, though? Like, he just didn't have any leverage, right? He's under contract. They could go, oh, sorry, we could tag you next year. You have to play for the amount that we have you already under contract for, unless you want to sit out. You want to sit out? Good luck with that at your age. I don't feel like he had much leverage at this point in time.
You're 100% correct, but why hold out in the first place then? Like, I guess I'm just not
trying it more.
Yeah, I guess there's no downside. And we talked about this last year with Brandon Ayuk a lot too, where it was like, to a certain point, there's no downside for either side for them not to practice, especially when you're looking at like a veteran guy who will be ready for the season for the most part. Kind of the same issue with Michael Parsons right now. But like, allegedly, he was offered slightly more money for a 3-year deal. And again, the Bengals never guarantee money after the first year. But the reason why I'm uncertain of why this makes a ton of sense is like you go back and look at guys like Von Miller, who in his last season when he got traded to the Rams before he signed with a long-term deal with the Bills, was a Pro Bowler and was a massive pass rush piece on a Super Bowl Super Bowl winning team, and his value went down the next year despite all that. And so it's just like a tricky situation, obviously, unless the Bengals just like totally want to move on. Because if you already are going to just sign a 1-year deal for less money right now, why wouldn't you at least give yourself the potential to earn that second-year deal? I think right now he's like a plus 3,300 odds to win the Defensive Player of the Year award. Like, I think it would have to take something like that to increase his value next year, but I just don't know if there's any way that he could have gotten a better contract than what the Bengals offered him, 1-year guarantee nonetheless.
I feel like I mean I heard that longer deal was very backloaded and so didn't necessarily like wasn't as attractive as one would want a multi-year deal to be. In terms of the 1 year and the situation that he found himself right now, kind of feel like this is a good, and maybe I'm wrong and people are throwing things right now as I say this, but I feel like this is a good compromise. Like if the Bengals are, if he is not in their plans for 2026, and I feel like this makes that fairly clear, then they at least gave him a raise for this year when they could have said, too bad, so sad, you're under contract. They instead paid him what he's worth for this year, at least, right? Like, or more arguably in the range of what he's worth. And so then, and it raises the price so that even though he didn't get a no tag clause in it, he's not going to get tagged because the rule is that it has to be 120% of your current deal or, the range of that's more than the other calculation. So it would put him at a number that is probably not one that they're going to pay him. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but I think it's probably unlikely, and he'll go and try to get a multi-year deal next year. What is the problem that exists for him is he just gets a year older.
Right.
And, let's assume that he is coming off a similar year as he is right now, that his value hasn't gone down because he got worse or hurt. What's the best case scenario? Like, what are we looking at in terms of comps? What can he realistically expect at his age, which will be, how old will he be next off season?
He'll be 32, I believe.
Is it Vaughn? Is it Vaughn's deal with the Bills?
Yeah, I think the construction of the Von Miller trade, the Von Miller contract situation with the Bills, like, I think that's the best thing to look at. I think it's maybe slightly different given that Trey is like a bigger body, not as much of a, outside rush linebacker, more of like a true defensive end that can play 3 downs. But I think that's got to be the expectation. And when you go back and look, I think Von Miller was, in between 9 and 10% of the cap. You apply that to next year's projection, which obviously always could change. It could go up, go down, but you're under that $30 million, $35 million mark. No matter how you split it. So I do like your approach and looking at it, Lindsay, where it's like, well, you could have just played out the year. Instead, you're making more money this year. And I think that could obviously be viewed as a victory for Trey Hendrickson and for Trey Hendrickson's camp. It's just interesting because, like, I didn't really feel that the Bengals, undervalued him to a certain degree. Like, it seemed as if everything that came out that they were willing to pay him, they just weren't willing to go past a second or third year.
Would you like to do an over-under on which day Micah Parsons is going to go top of market and sign with the Cowboys? Because it is obviously going to happen. Which day will it happen?
So when we talked about this earlier, Lindsay, when we were talking about this little agreement, I initially said this Thursday would be the day. And given the news,
days?
Yeah, like this Thursday, given the news, if we are of the belief, as we've talked about quite a bit, that this whole charade that is going on with Jerry Jones and Mike Parsons is just for the benefit of their marketing profile,
yes,
then, a great way to recapture the news after Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce got engaged would be to announce a $42 million AAV signing. So, I'm kind of liking my bet of this Thursday, but what are your thoughts?
Well, originally I was thinking kickoff, the day of the game, like just take over. Then I thought, if it was anyone else playing, that's Jerry Jones, is to go, the kickoff game, they're gonna, do what they do to celebrate the champs, and we're gonna steal those headlines. And right as you go on the air, and I believe they've done this before. Did they not literally do that with Dak?
Right, but they weren't the Thursday kickoff. They were the Sunday.
That's the twist, is that they are the game.
I was about to say, in an abundance of specificity, they are playing on Thursday of next week.
Yes. So if it was like the Ravens and Chiefs, then 100% that would be my bet. Absolutely. I could guarantee you that's the day that it's going to happen, so that they'll talk about them for the entire pregame, throw the rundown out. Oh, no, we got to talk about Micah for an hour. Now, though, the twist here is that the Eagles, who they are playing in this game, are the Super Bowl champs. Can we steal the entire pregame from talking about that? If you go, I don't want you talking about the fact that our hated rivals won the Super Bowl. I don't want that. That's not fun for me. Micah, take all my money. Go.
They'll be unveiling the banner, and Michael will be unveiling the Brinks truck.
We'll be shooting video of him, like someone with their camera is like, he's arriving at the stadium, and he's like running. I'll be there, you guys. Hold on. Get my helmet ready.
He'll be podcasting live from the locker room.
None of these like cool walk-ins where they're like wearing all the cool clothes like this. He's like, I'm coming. Don't worry. Just running a few minutes late. Had to sign it live on the field.
These are all
before you can put liability purposes. Check right here.
Look, we were hanging out with your friend Michael Fabiano, who is a massive Cowboys fan, and he was saying like he does the histrionics and the drama, he doesn't like it. And I was like, just Fabs, come on, man. Like, lean into it. This is excellent storyline. This is professional wrestling. Like that's what this is going on right now. It's just like good point. It's like Yellowstone, Landman, WWE. That's what's Dallas obviously is like the best comp.
I was just about to comp Jerry Jones to Triple H, and then I thought he would be very offended about that, right? Like, he's like, I am Vince McMahon. But then there are reasons to be offended about that. I'm just going to stop that comp right now. Okay, so we're in agreement, though, that this is happening before they play that game. I'm going to go with next Thursday on the day of kickoff, right up to the last minute for all of the Max drama, and you're going with this Thursday. So we've got a clean, line. We'll find out which one of us is right. Fun times today. Thanks to Mike Maccagnan and Chuck Bresnahan for joining us. Sam Bruchhaus. By the way, we did our SumerSports fantasy draft last night. And I may or may not have totally blown it as the commissioner. I don't know if our SumerSports gang from all of the different departments at SumerSports were quite ready for an 18-round, 14-person, no kicker, no defense, 4 flex spots, 8 bench spots draft.
Well, the funniest part, Lindsay, is obviously we had been spending the week talking about fantasy football the entire week. So then it was like a battle of smoke and mirrors, like trying to make sure that you didn't do what I thought you would do. And so as a result, I ended up drafting Bill Krosky-Merritt in the 7th round.
Yeah, well, which I at first made fun of because I think it was 7-4 in the 7th round, obviously 4th pick of the 7th round. But then I was like, oh, but when you do the math for 14, that puts him, roughly where his ADP is this week. So good for you for being able to do math.
Yeah. And there's a couple about who did you get Ollie Gordon or did I get Ollie Gordon and you got Jalen Wright? We have both sides.
I think we might.
We have both sides of the Dolphins.
And then there's one team that had to auto draft and picked several players who aren't on rosters. So we're gonna have to help him on the waiver wire because in this draft where 252 people were drafted, there's not going to be much left on waiver wires. So again, this will be fun to follow as the season goes on. We're back again next week, and you guys, we will have games to talk about. It's almost here.
Oh man, I can't wait, Lindsay. And hey, you're gonna have to stop me from talking about all the college games too. So we'll have games to watch on Saturday and Sunday.
I will
College
stop you.
games, and then we'll have like real games on Thursday.
At
It's been so long.
the very least, this is the way I'll stop you. I'll go, okay, they did that?
Hey,
Okay.
but
Like,
Lindsay,
it's going to go like this.
there are games this weekend with like real draft. There are games that we will be rewatching in like March, which will
At least
be
it's
like,
not 0 week.
Hey, whoa,
Just renumber.
whoa.
No, I'm just saying renumber.
You weren't-
Renumber.
You weren't watching Hawaii versus Stanford at like 10 p.m. Eastern?
No.
time?
No, but I'm aware it happened because my friend Tiffany Blackman did sideline for them. No, but my point is the numbering. Like, just call it week 1. It's like 0 period in school. Like, just you go to school, it's first period and it's early. Like, I don't understand. What are we doing 0? There's no -1 week. Like, we're just gonna keep going backwards.
So, Lindsay,
No, thank you.
in coding and in like computer science theory, everything is 0 indexed. So everything always starts at 0 because and there's like some theory to it, and I used to know it like years and years ago, but I'm kind of partial to the 0 indexed. So maybe that's why I like week 0.
Okay, well, I don't know enough about math to even push back on that, so I'm just say, okie doke. There you go, college 0 week. You won. Thank you so much for being here. The SumerSports Show will join you again next week.